Thank you very much, Dee. It was an amazing reading. Thank you. And now I'm happy to present to you Adam Gopnik, if there is any need to present him. We will discuss the link between food and memory with three incredibly talented pastry chefs who have imagined their own version of Proust Madeleine. Chef Eujin Lee from Lysée. Lysée is a new pastry boutique inspired by three cultures, the French, the Korean, and of course the New York City one, and we are very happy to have her with us. Chef Jimmy Leclerc, the executive pastry chef for Ladurée, and for Boulud, Chef Sebastien Rouxel. So that we have three already legendary brands for pastry together, and I cannot wait to give the floor to Adam. Adam, I just want to say that you have been writing for the New Yorkers in 1986, and during these 3 decades at the magazine, you have published hundreds of essays from personal memoirs to reviews and profiles, along with much reporting from abroad, always as fiction, humor, and art criticism. Your book, The Table Comes First, addresses the philosophy of eating, and you were made an officer in the Legion of Honor quite recently. Your upcoming book, The Real Work, will be released in March of the next year, and I think you're about to say a word about it. Adam, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, and a pleasure to hear that wonderful reading of that memorable but never unsurprising passage from early on in volume 1 of what is in the edition I favor, an 11-volume work. I don't think we can think often enough. Should we have it? Do I need a mic? Okay.
Thank you.
I thought my voice was sufficiently resonant and trained to carry through, but I will speak to you this way. It is one of the great and astonishing truths, not just of French literature, but of the passage and dialogue of Franco-American literature, that Marcel Proust, of all improbable people, would be not merely recognized universally as a major writer, but would also be an immensely popular writer, bringing us all together on this Sunday afternoon to celebrate not merely his poetic inspiration, but his transformation of our sensual lives, leading even into the way we choose to eat and enjoy a Madeleine. As that wonderful reading reminded us, one of the things that makes Proust an inspired writer is that he connected the sensual and the abstract, the sensory and the psychological, in a way no writer had done before him. And one of the things we relish, I think, and when we read Proust, is his double ability to render the particulars of the world utterly tangible, utterly real, utterly particular, and at the same time to connect those things like the taste of tea and the very last crumble of a Madeleine to a much larger structure of individual psychology, and eventually, as we unfold the book, or as then book unfolds us, a whole philosophy of time. I would hardly dare to get in the ring with Mr. Proust, to borrow a metaphor from Hemingway for a moment. But one of the things I think that's significant about any giant, any major writer, as Proust is in so many of our lives, is that they give license and permission to those of us Lilliputians who dance at their feet to explore avenues and ways of feeling and thinking that they have opened up for us. So I thought I would, if you would tolerate, read you a passage from my new book, which this will be the first time I have ever read out loud from it. It's still in bound galley. It will be published officially in March of the coming year, at which point, if you go to any bookstore from Altoona to Austin, you will bump into me with a crowd of perhaps 5 people desperately reading this book over and over again. As any of you know who are writers, that is a writer's fate in America. But I wanted to read you a section from it exactly because it suggests how the Proustian idea that tastes, and particularly the tastes of pastry and bread, are intimately tied to our memories, our childhood memories, and to our feelings about our family, and in particular about our mothers, how evident that can remain. This is a piece I wrote called Baking, a chapter in the book called Baking, that's very much about my Canadian mother and her attempt, her quixotic attempt, to teach me to bake. My mother has always been an expert, in-depth explainer, although her children have known to run for doors and leap out windows when she starts to say, well, studies show that. And my mother now explained what yeast was to me. Yeast, my mother explained, is really just a bunch of bugs rooming together, like Oberlin grads in Brooklyn. Eukaryotic organisms of the fungus kingdom, king of mushrooms. She said, when you mix the little bugs with a carbohydrate, wet wheat is a good one, they begin to eat up all the oxygen in it, and then they pass gas made up of ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. The alcohol they pass is what makes spirits. The carbon dioxide is what makes bread. The gas they pass causes the dough to rise. It's what puts the bubbles in the bread. If you bake it, all you're doing, she explained, is to trap or fix the bubbles inside. As we mixed and kneaded, the comforting sounds of my childhood reasserted themselves. The steady hum of the powerful electric mixer my mother uses, the dough hook humming and coughing as it turned, and in harmony with it, the sound of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in the background, offering its perpetual mixture of grave-sounding news and bright-sounding Baroque music. A certain kind of Canadian, my mother, keeps the CBC on from early morning to bedtime, indiscriminately. Like most good cooks, my mother is sweet-tempered in the run-up to cooking and short-tempered in the actual event. For all its universality, bread's chemistry, or really biology, is, I realized as she explained it, a little creepy. She went on, the longer it takes the little bugs to eat up the oxygen, the better the bread tastes. The high heat of the baker's oven simply kills off the remaining little bugs while leaving their work preserved in place. It's all those carbon dioxide bubbles which become fixed as the nice spongy holes of the crumb of the bread. The tasty bits of your morning toast, I realized, are all the tombs of tiny dead creatures. The Ozymandias phenomenon on a miniature scale. Look on my works, you mighty, and eat them with apricot jam. I go on then to talk about learning to bake with my mother, who's a wonderful French baker who does, you'll forgive me for saying so, the best croissants still that I've ever eaten, or at least I should say the most densely buttery ones I've ever eaten, and has actually invented a boisson, a cross between a brioche and croissant, with which she used to belabor us on breakfast. But what particularly fascinated me as time went on is that my mother is still alive, but fading somewhat, and no longer baking. And I meditated then on the nature of yeast again, but thinking of yeast not merely as a thing that passes gas to make the bubbles in your bread, but as something that endures past memory. I wrote not long ago, as I was finishing this book and talking to my parents in a pain-stumbling manner, I began to think about the sourdough starter that my mother had cultivated for all those years. She's been keeping a sourdough starter, as bakers do, a mother, for as long as she's been my mother, at least, which is 60 plus years. What would become of it when she was no longer there to make it or use it, I wondered. And then, speaking to a scientist expert in all things yeast, I found out something startling and oddly comforting. Not only does sourdough starter live forever, yeast begetting yeast, like one of those chains of generations in the Bible, but the traces of DNA from bakers long gone remain fertile within the starter. The schmutz is still present generations later. It is the traces that doubtless make the flavor. I recalled asking a gastronome what accounted for the extraordinary and distinct flavor of the smoked brisket at Schwartz's Delicatessen in Montreal. The schmutz in the smoke room. He said bluntly, schmutz is Yiddish for dirt. It was true. Once the back room was cleaned out, the savor and intensity of whole peppercorns was gone. Our mother's fingers stumble, and I should add perhaps too, because it was a fascinating thing that I found out that you can trace on the hands of French bakers in provincial villages, DNA of sourdough that's at least 200 or 300 years old. It still is vital on their hands. It has been passed down from one generation of bakers to the next. Our mother's fingers stumble as she ages, yet our mother's hands live on. Shakespeare put his trust to immortality variously in marble monuments and rhymes. What will survive of us is love, another more famously sour poet told us, Philip Larkin. Acclaimed hedge to be shored by a sequence of almost. The truth is simpler. What will survive of us is sourdough starter. What will survive of us is schmutz. But then sourdough starter and schmutz, being living, however lowly their life may be, are perhaps a safer guarantee of eternity than all the marble monuments in the world. That's my own little Proustian meditation on bread and yeast. And as you can see, and as I think is probably true for everyone in this room, our first sensory and taste memories are inexorably tied up with our childhood memories of mothers and fathers, grandmothers and great aunts, great uncles, and older brothers who first introduced us to the sensory world. So blessed to be on the stage with these master bakers. I wondered if I could ask each of you what your primary original memory of taste and baking is that takes you back to your childhood as my mother's sourdough took me.
So for me,
Is it on? Here, take mine.
Yeah. Maybe better. Sorry. For me, actually, it goes back when I was 5 to 6 years old. And it was from my dad who started baking my birthday cake every year. I think for like 10 years. It was a simple kind of genoise, I would say, with raspberry jam.
Where are you living at this moment?
I was living in France, yeah, in the west of France, yeah. In the west of France, yeah, from Nantes. This area.
Like Jacques Demy.
Yes, exactly. No. And then, Nantes, yeah. Yeah? See? We're neighbors.
The cradle of French baking. Yes, go on.
And then he will bake this biscuit that you will do from scratch. It's his secret recipe that he have, kind of a genoise soft biscuit with jam. Roll it over. Looks more like a Yule log actually for Christmas than a birthday cake. But it was
Noel of a kind.
Yeah, kind of Eujin Noel, but for my birthday, which is in May. But and it was, and he kept doing that same dessert for 10 years, you know, until I was 15 years when I started doing my working in pastry and bakery. So then I started doing
your formation in
the formation, in Nantes also. Yeah.
So sorry, go on.
So yeah, that's what my earliest remember of sweet cake and stuff is from when I was 5 or 6. Yeah, for my birthday, baked from my dad. Yeah.
Did you have any intimation at that moment that it would be something that you would do as a vocation for life?
No. To be honest, I had no idea. No, it started a bit later when I was 11 years old that I started having this passion for bread. I started being a baker first, and a few years after I started with pastry. But I don't know from where it came from, to be honest. Yeah, maybe from those cake from my dad or something else. But yeah.
Would you say that there's a difference between the vocation of boulangerie and of patisserie? Is there a difference in, should everyone begin baking bread and then move on?
I don't think it's very connected, yeah. There was a connection for me when I did actually my first formation in bakery. It included also chocolate, so it was also part of bakery, but also a side of pastry. And the logical following of that was doing the pastry formation. Yeah.
So do you bake it all? Do you do bread at all now?
I still doing some bread more at home. A few also. We are Ladurée. We have some bread that we bake also ourselves, but I'm more on the pastry side now. But I still have passion for bread. Yeah.
Eugène, same question to you. What's your key childhood memory, your Proustian memory of bread taste and family?
Yeah. So when I was young, like maybe I think same thing, like 5, 6, 7 years old, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. They lived in a small town, and then they have their farms.
Where are we living?
In Korea, South Korea, and then south of South Korea. So it was a small town, and then from around nature, and then they have their farms. So when I go there, it was specific. Especially for during like New Year's and then Thanksgiving, like the family gathering. So my grandma she's the best chef, and then she cooked very well, and she cooked for everyone. But she recorded her from her farms, yes. And she cooked with the sesame and rice, brown rice. So. I had a fun to help her, and then made some little sweet treats for everyone. So she toasted the brown rice and then rice in sesame buckwheat, and we made a caramelized stuff. So it's a little small pieces.
Like a bonbon.
Yeah, like a bonbon. So it's called gangjang in Korean. So that's my strong memory from childhood, because I grew up with smelling. I really love the smelling like toasted brown rice and toasted some cereal stuff. So that's why I made it Madeleine with the toasted brown rice today.
Wow.
So yeah, that's my childhood memory.
So we're getting an original, a hybrid of...
Yes, from Madeleine, French Madeleine.
And your child, that's fantastic. Tell us a little bit, if you would, about, because you work as a kind of trilateral hybrid baker in New York and participating in many traditions. Growing up, was there an indigenous and Asian Korean tradition of baking of the kind that the French tradition emphasizes?
At the period, not at all. And then right now we have a lot of like French chef and then European style pastry in Korea, but at that moment, no. But I really love baking and pastry, so that's why I dreamed to be a pastry chef, and I wanted to go to France. So when I was 18 years old, I moved to France by myself.
That was a courageous...
Yeah, I say bye, mom and dad, and then I left to France. I left Korea, and then I grew up in France for professionally from 2006 to 2016, so around 11 years. And then 2016, I moved to New York to be executive pastry chef at 2 Michelin star restaurant. And then now...
Which one was that?
Chongshik. It's Chongshik,
yes,
Korean
yes,
fine
yes.
dining restaurant in Tribeca. And this year, I opened my own pastry shop, Lysée, in Flatiron. So this year in June.
That's,
it's been
that's
6
amazing.
months.
Did you speak French when you went to study in France?
Just bonjour, je m'appelle Eujin. Je suis coréenne, ouais, c'est tout.
So you attended school and did your formation in baking, and you had to learn your French at the same time.
Yes. So before leaving Korea, I learned French a little bit in the French Institute. But when I arrived in France, for me, everyone was so nice, and I learned a lot from just speaking with them naturally, and then, yeah.
That's amazing. That's courageous and amazing to have done it. Sebastian, the same question to you.
Same question. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Excited to be talking about Proust. I have to say, I like the corinet, which was the long Madeleine, which was easier to dip in your coffee or in your tea. I like those better, I'm sorry. So yeah.
You have to do a new edition of Proust in which
I do, yeah. I'm going to prove to him that the corinet is easier. No, I came, obviously I come from France. I moved here for, 26 years ago. My grandma is my inspiration. She was an amazing cook. My mom was terrible, so we used to cook at my grandma. She was teaching me how to do stuff. My aunt had a restaurant across the street.
In Nantes?
In Nantes, yeah. So I spent a lot of time there, and I was not the brightest at school. So one day my dad says to me, if you can't use your head, you're gonna have to use your hands. And from that day, I said, okay, I'm going to go in a restaurant and, do the best that I can. And then I became a pastry chef, That's where I am today. I moved to the United States and with no expectation to come here. And then here I am, 26 years later.
And you did your formation in baking in Nantes as well?
Yeah, in Nantes, yeah, as well.
Yeah. In a school or with a baker, as an apprentice to a baker?
Well, we do the same thing. We have apprenticeship, which you spend 1 week at school and 3 weeks in a company. So you do that for 2 years, and then after that you pass your diploma, and then after that I did what they call BTM, which is another step. And then after that, at that time we had to do our military duty, and I actually wanted to quit the industry because it was so hard, and I was like, F that, it's just too much work. And then somehow I ended up at the Messe de l'Élysée, and to cook for a year. And then I'm like, I guess it's going to be my career forever then.
I have always thought, because I've heard the same succession from many French bakers I know, that going into the military after baking all day must be very easy, actually.
Oh yeah, for sure. I had it pretty sweet. We had to work from 6 to 2, and then after that we were free to do whatever we wanted.
Right. Yeah. So it was nothing.
It was nothing. Nothing. We were going out every night.
I worked in a 3-star French kitchen for a couple of weeks for my own amusement when I lived in France, and I could not get over the degree of brutality involved in the transactions of the kitchen every day.
Absolutely.
Did you find that to be true as well, Jimmy?
I think it changed a lot. Like many years ago, 20 years ago, it was more brutal than now. Yeah. It's a bit more. But we were talking about passion before. You need to have passion for this kind of work. Yeah? To wake up at 4 a.m. every day is not something that everyone can do, I guess. Yeah, and long hours standing. So yeah. And
a master who's hyper exacting. The teacher, the baker is hyper exacting. Yes, always wants it perfect.
Yes. So there is a lot of pressure. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, when I said, did you have the same?
Same thing. Yeah, there's a lot of discipline. That's what we learn in the army is discipline and teamwork. Working with your friends and your teammate, because at the end of the day we can't do it by ourselves. To be successful, you need to have a team that works with you.
Yes, I've always had the sense too that doing pastry or doing bread baking is, would you agree, the most exacting of all of the culinary arts, because there's no place in it for a mistake. You can't spill in a little too much of this or that. It's almost has the exactitude of chemistry or of a science.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think the best way to learn is to make mistakes, so you learn from your mistakes, and then it makes you better.
I think many recipes were born from mistake, actually.
Oh, yes, really?
Tarte tatin, many
stuff. Oh, tarte tatin is a mistake? You have to explain that.
I think it was a mistake from the beginning, that they put the apple upside down, instead on the top, and they bake it this way, so yeah. And there is many, in bakery also, like we have different fermentation, like Polish, which is a lot of water with yeast and flour, leave it for hours. And that's also born from a mistake of an apprentice, who put too much water on the mix of the bread.
Yeah, and then you get away with it if it works, if it makes something good. One of the things that's obviously fascinates me is the richness of French literature about food, as well as the French practice of it too. This is obviously for all of you. In your formation as a baker, did you read much? Did you ever have an opportunity to read Proust or to read more broadly about the art of baking and memory of baking, or were you focused on the profession of it? Whoever?
No, yeah. For me, no. For me, I focus more on the professional one.
On the.
Well, no, I did not read any Proust, but...
Then Proust couldn't bake, so...
We went to the same school, so...
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
You're even. It fascinates me, though, what you were saying, Sebastien, about your grandmother. I found that to be true so often, and it's one of the themes of Proust, of course, as all of you know, is that he's much more intimate, the narrator, is much more intimate with his grandmother than with his mother. The grandmother is the nurturing figure in the book. I think that's the particularity of French family life.
That's what it was for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think every family is different. Yeah, for me, it was a bit different. It was with my father, which really is more with the mother that you cook. I cook a lot more with my father. Yeah. He's the one who teaches me more stuff about bread and dessert. Yeah.
And your family were not really.
Same as Sebastien. My mom was bad, and my father was better to cook, and my grandma, she was amazing.
Yeah, no, exactly. My mother, as I explained in this book, was a passionate baker who went to France in the other direction from being a Jewish girl in Philadelphia to learn her baking in France as well. She never practiced it professionally, but she then brought it back and stuffed her 6 children with these things as she became a professor. Tell us a bit, if you each would, about how you approached the Madeleine challenge that we gave you.
So on a Ladurée side, we did a collaboration this year with Villa Albertine. So we created a nice box, and we create a macaron with a Madeleine flavor. Madeleine de Proust, yeah.
Because Ladurée does macaron as a thing. Yeah. I am old enough to remember when Ladurée was one little store in Paris on the Rue Royale, where we used to go with our children for an omelette and a macaroon. Now it's an empire of
a lot more
of that too. And you?
So from Lysée, we prepare the Madeleine. I really like the shape of Madeleine, so we just stayed with the regular shape of Madeleine. And as I explained previously, I made a toasted brown rice flavor of Madeleine. So it's garnished with brown rice caramel, and there at the bottom we have a toasted brown rice powder, and we glaze with glaze of brown rice as well. So you have when you taste it, you have like nutty and toasty flavor.
Oh, so it truly is a hybrid Asian French Asian.
That's who I am. So
that's fantastic.
Thank you.
For me, Daniel is known for making Madeleine à la minute for every guest that comes at the table. So we bake them. They take about 5 minutes to bake. So what I wanted to do is using the same recipe and tweak it a little bit. Of course, there's a lot of butter in it. It's the season, it's Christmas. It's going to be a lot of gathering. You're going to bring your friend at home, your family, and that's the spirit of holiday, and we want to share food, So my idea for today was to, make a little loaf, it's like a big Madeleine, if you will, for you to take home and share with your friends and family. So on your way out, you will have one waiting for you.
That's fantastic, Sebastien. Thank you. That's like a little, what you call it, like a quatre coeurs of a Madeleine.
Yeah,
now, should a Madeleine ideally have some kind of spirit, some kind of alcohol in it?
Well, mine has Grand Marnier.
Good.
And then on the inside is... French people, they love alcohol.
Yes. Americans too.
Yeah, I guess.
Koreans too.
Okay, good.
We share a similar corruption anywhere we go. So yours says Grand Marnier?
No alcohol.
No alcohol. No alcohol. Well, I think we'll all try the Grand Marnier one then. That's fantastic. Oh, I did want to add, by the way, I've mentioned in passing about Nantes and Jacques Demy, but there is an incredible vision of Nantes in the 1930s and 1940s in the wonderful film Jacques de Nantes by Agnès Varda, the great French filmmaker. And I urge everyone who hasn't seen that film to see it, whether you're a patriot of Nantes like our colleagues or just a lover of French cinema. It's one of the most beautiful studies it's about her husband, Jacques Demy, to my mind, a supreme French filmmaker, and about his childhood in Nantes in those years. And it's got a wonderful Charles Trenet score, and I urge, if you haven't seen it, everyone in this room certainly should. I know that today I stand as an obstacle between you and the chance to taste do this wonderful tasting. But let me elongate the obstacle a little bit longer, just by asking if you have questions for any of us, or for Dee, or for myself about Proust and the psychology and alchemy of the Madeleine. Any question on any Proustian topic is welcome, or any baking topic for that matter. Yes, lady here.
I have a question about the Madeleines to all the chefs. What's your favorite way to eat a Madeleine? What would you pair it?
I'll repeat the question for if you couldn't hear it. The question is for all of our chefs. What's your favorite way to eat a Madeleine? And in Proust, of course, he dips it in tea, and that's one way. But do you have a favorite way, or should it not be corrupted? Should baking not be corrupted by liquid of any kind?
For me, it will be like Sebastien was saying, à la minute, because you keep the freshness of the Madeleine and dip in hot chocolate.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, can we do that at Ladurée? This sounds like
we can.
This sounds delicious. Honey?
I think for me, I prefer to eat with tea or coffee because I think it's perfect for tea time. And yes,
Green tea or Darjeeling? What kind of tea should we indulge with?
I personally really like the green tea and some white tea too. So Earl Grey or whatever tea, not too strong, so you can enjoy the flavor of Madeleine.
Fantastic. Sebastian?
As well, when I was younger, it would be hot chocolate, but now I'd rather have it in my coffee.
That's what happens to us as we age, right?
As we age, yeah, right.
We need less sugar and more caffeine to get through the day. Thank you for that question. Someone else, lady back here. Stand up.
For coming and sharing with us. It's really great. Thank you all for sharing with us. I can project.
Yeah, project and I'll repeat.
Thanks for sharing with us. I'm curious, being Proust's favorite artist was Vermeer, and how he kind of encapsulated and romanticized the everyday from a woman like pouring milk into a jug. Culturally, was the Madeleine, or is it like a very common cookie where he's chosen the Madeleine as something that is very common and he makes it something amazing, kind of like Vermeer does? Or is it more of a treat? I'm curious culturally, why did he choose the Madeleine?
So that's an interesting question. In French culinary culture, is the Madeleine a refined treat, or is it a completely commonplace treat? I mean, if your point is that if you were writing about a chocolate chip cookie in America, you would understand that it was completely popular, whereas if you were writing about a Madeleine, you'd know it was something refined. What is the place of a Madeleine in French baking and French culinary culture? Very common, or does it express refinement? And
I would say very common. Yeah, very common. It's something you can find in every bakery, in every pastry. Yeah,
right throughout France in that way too. Yeah, so it's part of Proust's ambition to take. I think you're exactly right. I think that's a wonderful analogy with Vermeer, who of course appears again and again in Proust. If some of you may remember, in this first volume, Swann, the hero of the first volume, is Charles Swann, is obsessed with two things. He's obsessed with a Vermeer landscape and a patch of yellow in a Vermeer landscape, and with the face of the woman he falls in love with, Odette de Crécy, who resembles a Botticelli. It's one of my favorite little bits of snobism in Proust, because he identifies Odette, if you recall, with a face in the Sistine Chapel in Rome, but the face isn't on the Michelangelo ceiling, it's on the Botticelli frescoes that are below the ceiling. And only an aesthete of Proust's generation and extreme refinement would refuse to look up. They thought of this Michelangelo ceiling as a bit vulgar and common, and they only looked down at the Botticellis in the lower register. But I think that you're exactly right, that one of the things Proust is doing in his book, and as the delight in Dee's reading reminded us, is he's saying anything, no matter how small or commonplace, contains the whole of eternity within it, that the division we make in life between the elevated and the commonplace is always false, that the most commonplace things contain the most elevated emotions. And I think that's part of the profound humanism of Proust. So thank you for reminding us of that truth. Gentleman here.
So since we have three experts here, I'd like you to tell us, why is the Madeleine so delicious?
Butter. It's half the recipe.
Yeah, I think that's the answer, yeah. A lot of butter, alcohol for some of us. and yeah, I get the texture that we have in a Madeleine. The texture, the flavors, yeah. It's a good mix of everything. I get the crunchy part on the outside, soft inside. Yeah.
I think the beauty of the Madeleine and Proust is less is more. I always say that to my staff, less is more. Some people try to make too many ingredients, too many things. The beauty about the Madeleine is it's just a little cookie with not that many ingredients and impacted so many people. That's pretty remarkable for me.
I love Madeleine when it comes out from the oven, and when you bake the Madeleine, it smells really good. It's very, it's very beautiful smell in the kitchen. So yeah, that's why I think it's very buttery, and also crispy outside and soft inside. And I love to use the brown butter instead of regular butter inside, so you have more strong flavor. So yeah, Madeleine is good.
You know, it's fun. It's so interesting you say that, because I wrote a whole chapter in my book about the philosophy of eating, The Table Comes First, which is just about that principle, that deliciousness is really very simple in life. It's anything that's crispy on the outside and scrumptious on the inside. We human beings love. That's the common thing. The other thing, thinking about what you're saying, that comes to my mind is that so much of what's greatest in French cooking, but in French baking particularly, is not, though I know how expert you have to be to make it, it's not in itself necessarily that refined. There's something very simple and enfantine about the Madeleine, or about the flan, or about those simple, delicious things that we love in the French repertoire. You know, I always think about how at Paulin in Paris, at the great bakers, they make bread, and then they make an apple tart and a flan, and that's it. And it's an announcement that that's all you need.
Absolutely.
Another question. There must be more. Lady here.
May I speak French?
Of course.
J'aimerais comprendre pourquoi la forme de la Madeleine représente une coquille Saint-Jacques. Pourquoi la Madeleine a la forme d'une coquille Saint-Jacques?
Does everyone understand the question? The lady's asking. She'd like to know why the Madeleine has the form of what we would call a scallop, of a coquille Saint-Jacques. Why does it have that shell form imprinted on it? And if you can't answer this question, you'll be deported back to France. Because I have no idea. Why? Do you know, Jimmy?
Yeah, the same answer as my colleague. I don't know.
No clue.
Any?
I wasn't born then.
Does anyone? I'll open it up to. Does anyone have a theory about why that is? I know that the reason it does is because the tray you bake it in has that form. But as you can see, I have limitless theories, though very little information about all of these questions. And I think maybe it may be as simple as that. It's better for dipping to have all those ridges, and that the ridges are there. Is that possible?
Could be, yeah.
Could be, very polite. It's a very polite way of a Frenchman saying no. But thank you.
More crusty surface.
More crusty surface. More crispy outside for the scrumptious inside. That's a perfect answer.
If I may, Wikipedia has another theory I just discovered, is that it was a way to make the Madeleine more appealing for the pilgrims on their way to Saint-Jacques de Compostelle.
That's a wonderful explanation. If that's not true, it just became true, because it should be true. That's a wonderful explanation, because it is indeed the form you see always in that. I know we should move on and allow everyone
one last question.
To test question, but let's take one last question, please.
One last question.
Lady here.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I just read a little book called Living and Dying with Marcel Proust, and supposedly he claimed if he wasn't a writer, he would have been a baker.
Yes, this is true. I think that's probably not the case. It was one of those things writers say. You ask a writer something, and they'll tell you what sounds good, because Proust was a man of mind and body. But it is true, and it's one of the things that's very significant, I think, about Proust as a kind of last thought before we go and enjoy these wonderful things. We have an image of Proust in our heads very often, of Proust as an elegant aesthete of lassitude and refinement, and that's true. But Proust was an incredibly hard worker. For all that he lived in a cork-lined room and was ill, or regarded himself as ill for most of his life, everyone who knew him talked about his extraordinary work habits. You couldn't produce a book of that length, which he constantly revised and expanded, as Antonin Compagnon, the great Proust scholar at Columbia, reminded us in a symposium a few years ago. The book was originally supposed to be half the length that it finally achieved, because the Albertine stories, which are a complicated personal tale for him, expanded the book so much. And there's a wonderful story in an English literary memoir of someone, I think it's Ford Madox Ford, who knew Proust. And Proust ran from his house to Ford's auberge in Dieppe just to invite him to dinner. Proust was a man of immense refinement, but also a man of limitless energy, like any great baker. Thank you all for coming. Why don't we go and have a proper tasting?